The kitchen light hummed above me, harsh and unforgiving, bouncing off the clean counter I had wiped only minutes before, when a single sentence landed and split the air open inside my chest. I remember the clock ticking too loud, the smell of soap still on my hands, the way my body went cold before my thoughts could catch up. In that instant, everything I believed about my marriage quietly collapsed. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt blindsided by someone you trusted, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Stories like this happen behind closed doors every day. I stood there breathing slowly, realizing the ground I thought was solid had been shifting for years without me noticing. Nothing was raised, nothing was dramatic, and that's what made it devastating. I had no idea then how much I was about to uncover, or what it would cost me to finally be seen. That was the moment everything began to unravel. I was standing in my kitchen when my marriage quietly cracked open. My husband said something calmly, almost thoughtfully, and in that moment I realized he no longer saw me as a partner, but as a problem to be managed. My name is Claire. And until that evening, I believed I understood the life we were building. The apartment in Columbus was warm from dinner, rosemary still hanging in the air, dishes drying beside the sink. Nothing looked broken. His voice carried no anger, no edge, just the confidence of someone announcing a decision already made. Inside me, something dropped. I felt confusion first, then a slow, spreading chill as the meaning settled. I stood there replaying the sentence in my head, trying to fit it into 6 years of shared plans and quiet routines. It did not fit. I had thought our marriage was solid because it was calm, because we rarely fought. In that silence, I finally understood the difference between peace and being unseen. And once I saw it, I knew nothing about us was stable anymore. I thought we were a team in the quiet, unremarkable ways that matter most. We met in our 20s, built a life that looked simple from the outside, and I believed simplicity meant strength. We shared mornings rushing to work, evenings folding laundry, weekends fixing small problems before they became big ones. Nothing flashy, just steady. I was never the dramatic one. I liked routines, liked knowing where things belonged. I believed love was proven in consistency, in showing up without being asked. I trusted that what we built together belonged to both of us, even when our roles looked different. I told myself that balance did not have to be perfect to be fair. Looking back, I can see how often I adjusted without noticing. I picked up tasks naturally, filled gaps before they were visible. I handled details because it felt easier than explaining them. I told myself this was partnership, that we were supporting each other in different ways. I did not keep score because I believed we were on the same side. That night, when his words settled into my chest, something in that belief cracked. The life I thought we shared suddenly felt conditional, like it only counted if it could be measured. Being reduced to a burden hurt more than anger ever could. I realized then that instead of defending myself, I needed to understand exactly what I had been carrying all along. I stayed silent, already choosing calm agreement over confrontation, even as confusion gave way to a strange, deliberate clarity inside me. I felt the urge to argue rise and then settle. The words had hurt, but something steadied me instead of breaking loose. I realized that fighting would only keep me trapped inside his framing, defending my worth on his terms. So I chose calm. I agreed quickly, almost gently. I watched his posture loosen, relief spreading across his face as if a burden had lifted. He'd expected resistance, tears, maybe anger. My quiet acceptance confused him more than any outburst could have. In that moment, I stopped reacting and started thinking. Inside, I felt myself step back. The pain did not disappear, but it sharpened into focus. I saw that this separation he wanted could reveal more than it hid. If fairness was suddenly important, then clarity would be too. I could finally see the structure of our life without the soft blur of assumptions. As he relaxed, I began counting in a different way, not numbers yet, but moments, responsibilities I had absorbed without comment. Decisions I made so he would not have to, the invisible weight I carried because it felt natural to do so. My agreement was not surrender. It was the first quiet step away from confusion and toward truth. While he thought the tension had ended, I reviewing everything he had failed to see, I was never absent from our life. I was everywhere in it. I worked my job during the day, steady and reliable, then shifted into another role the moment I walked through the door. Bills were paid because I tracked due dates. Appointments happened because I scheduled them. Groceries appeared because I planned meals, watched prices, remembered what we ran out of. I contributed financially in ways that blended into the background. Extra income went into shared accounts without announcements. Savings grew quietly because I prioritized stability over recognition. When something broke, I handled it. When plans changed, I adjusted them. The outcome looked effortless because I designed it that way. What he saw were results: clean clothes, warm meals, a calendar that ran smoothly. What he never saw were the systems behind them, the lists in my head, the decisions made early so problems never reached him. I absorbed small stresses daily so he could focus on bigger ambitions. Over time, my support became invisible even to me. I stopped naming it because it felt like part of loving someone, but invisibility has a cost. When effort is unseen long enough, it gets mistaken for ease. When care is constant, it gets mistaken for nothing. That misunderstanding opened the door for disrespect. It allowed him to believe success was solitary and support was optional, and it did not come from nowhere. Ideas like that are learned, repeated, and reinforced. I was about to understand exactly where his certainty came from and why it sounded so familiar. Those voices had shaped his confidence long before he spoke to me, and their influence would soon surface, forcing me to confront not just him, but the beliefs he had inherited without ever questioning them or understanding the damage they quietly caused inside. I did not believe his certainty came from nowhere. Over time, I began to recognize another presence in our marriage, one that never lived in our home but shaped its atmosphere. It came from family, offered as concern, repeated often enough to sound like wisdom. The message was subtle. He was working hard. He deserved more control. Independence was framed as strength, and partnership quietly redefined as dependency. These ideas were never shouted. They arrived gently, wrapped in praise for his ambition and warnings about being taken advantage of. I watched how repetition hardened them. Each visit, each phone call, reinforced the same narrative until it settled into him as fact. Generational beliefs about roles and entitlement slipped into daily thinking, disguised as advice meant to protect him. I could feel the shift before I could name it. What unsettled me most was how easily those ideas excused dismissing my contributions. If support was expected, then gratitude was unnecessary. If control was justified, then fairness became optional. Slowly, the voice outside our marriage gave him permission to believe he was standing up for himself, when he was actually standing on me. By the time he spoke that sentence in our kitchen, those beliefs were already fixed, ready to be tested through action, and the consequences were closer than I realized. I remember the bank lobby feeling unusually quiet, polished to make money feel orderly and harmless. Soft lights, clean desks, neutral smiles. Sitting there, I felt oddly detached, like I was watching someone else's life get reorganized. The separation of our finances was presented as simple, procedural, fair. I listened carefully, nodded, and focused on structure instead of emotion. Numbers have a way of cutting through confusion, and I needed clarity. I insisted on exact balance, on clear boundaries, on tracking everything that moved through our shared life. This was not punishment, it was precision, fairness, once named, demands, consistency. I could see his confidence waver as structure replaced assumption. The idea of independence had sounded empowering until accountability arrived. For the first time, he hesitated. Sensing that control felt different when it applied to both of us, I stayed calm, observational, aware that this was not a win. It was a test. The real consequences would not show up on paper, but in kitchens, closets, and ordinary days at home. As we left the building, I felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest. Systems had been set. Now reality would answer them. I understood then that fairness is neutral only in theory. In practice, it reveals who has been carrying the weight all along. Walking back to the car, I knew the reckoning would be quiet, slow, and impossible to ignore. What happened next would unfold inside our daily life, where effort, not intention, finally speaks. And once it did, nothing between us would ever feel invisible again. I did not announce any change. I simply stopped filling the gaps I had been quietly covering for years. I cooked for myself and left the rest untouched. I bought what I needed and nothing extra. I handled my own schedule and let the rest sit where it fell. At first, nothing dramatic happened. The house looked the same. Then small cracks appeared. Coffee ran out because no one tracked it. Groceries stopped making sense. Meals became random, uneven, unsatisfying. Laundry piled up in unfamiliar ways. White shirts dulled, then stayed that way. I stayed calm. I moved through the house without fixing, correcting, or anticipating. I noticed how often I had prevented inconvenience before it formed. Now inconvenience arrived daily. Bills caused confusion. Appointments were missed. Supplies vanished without replacement. Each small failure carried weight because it demanded attention. I could feel the strange shift from background noise into foreground stress. His frustration grew quietly. Not anger, just exhaustion. He worked all day, then came home to a second job he did not know how to do. Responsibility felt heavier than expected when no one softened it. I watched without satisfaction or cruelty. This was not punishment. It was consequence. Life did not collapse, but it stopped running smoothly. By the end of the week, he looked worn down in a new way, tired from existing, not just working. I understood then that the unraveling would not stay private for long. The strain was building toward a moment where effort would be visible to others, and the illusion of ease would finally break. Even simple requests became heavy. Decisions waited for answers that never came. I could sense embarrassment beginning to surface, though unspoken. When pressure moves outward, it seeks witnesses. I knew a gathering was coming, a moment where private imbalance would step into the open and refuse to hide in front of people who assumed life fine. The dinner had always followed an unspoken script. Family arrived at the same time. Food was ready. The table looked effortless. This time, I did not step into my usual role. I stayed calm and clear, letting responsibility land where it belonged. As the afternoon moved closer to evening, tension crept in. The house felt unprepared. Food choices were scattered, timing uncertain. I watched him move through the kitchen with growing unease, realizing too late how much planning these moments required. I did not intervene. When family walked in, expectations collided with reality. The table looked bare. The food was mismatched and cold. Polite confusion filled the room. I sat quietly, observing how quickly discomfort spreads when routines fail. What struck me most was not his struggle, but the shift in how others saw it. An outside voice finally named what I had lived with for years. Not harshly, not cruelly, just plainly. The imbalance was obvious now that it was visible. What had once been private became undeniable. I felt something loosen in my chest. Validation arrived without my asking. I did not need to defend myself or explain. The truth stood on its own. As the evening ended, he looked smaller somehow, exposed, alone with the realization that what he thought happened naturally had always been sustained by someone else. I knew then that public exposure was only the beginning. What followed would be quieter and more exacting. The reckoning would move behind closed doors, into numbers, memory, and proof, where there would be no audience to soften the impact. I brought the folder out quietly, placed it on the table, and sat down. It was not dramatic. It was thick, worn at the edges, filled with years I had tracked without thinking I would ever need proof. Inside were records of my income, steady and consistent, paychecks from my teaching job, deposits from tutoring that went straight into shared accounts, numbers that showed I had contributed nearly $400,000 over the course of our marriage, quietly, without ceremony. There were pages detailing housing costs, rent, utilities, internet, amounts I covered beyond half, month after month, adding up to more than $48,000. Grocery receipts followed, household supplies, gifts for his family, holidays and birthdays. Over $30,000 spent keeping our life functioning smoothly. Then came the work that never had receipts. 15 hours a week cooking and cleaning, 10 more managing schedules, repairs, and family obligations. I calculated conservatively. Even at minimum rates, it totaled nearly $200,000 of unpaid labor. I let the silence stretch. I watched the numbers land. Assumptions fell apart under their own weight. This was not about money anymore. It was about reality. I felt no triumph, only relief mixed with grief. Relief that the weight had a name. Grief that it took documentation to prove my existence. The folder was never meant to punish. It was meant to translate years of silence into language that could no longer be ignored. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. I did not ask for apologies or promises. I said what I had needed all along. I wanted to be seen. Not later, not conditionally, fully, honestly, and without minimization. The truth sat between us now, undeniable, and something inside him finally collapsed. I remained still, breathing evenly. After the folder closed, the room went still, not tense, not explosive, heavy. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes every breath feel louder. I did not move. Neither did he. I could see the shift happen without a single word. His shoulders dropped. His jaw loosened. Anger had nowhere to stand anymore. There was nothing left to argue with. Numbers do not react. They wait. Later that night, another truth reached him, carried by someone whose voice he had always trusted. Not accusatory, not emotional, just clear. A reminder of who had organized birthdays, remembered obligations, kept connections alive. The weight of that recognition settled slowly, but it stayed. Shame filled the space anger used to occupy. Not performative shame, not loud regret. The quiet kind that makes eye contact difficult and sleep restless. I watched him sit with it, finally unable to deflect or minimize. For the first time, I felt no need to explain myself. Silence had become confirmation. Understanding had arrived. But understanding is passive. It does not clean kitchens or plan weeks or carry responsibility forward. As I went to bed, I knew this was only an ending of belief, not behavior. What mattered next would not be what he felt, but what he did. Responsibility was waiting, heavy and unavoidable. He did not change overnight. He started by trying to do the small things I had always handled without comment. He washed clothes and ruined half of them, colors bleeding into whites. He cooked simple meals and burned them, then stared at the mess like it had betrayed him. He vacuumed once and broke the machine. Each attempt left him more tired, not the tiredness of meetings or deadlines, but the exhaustion of managing life itself. Lists multiplied, groceries spoiled, schedules overlapped. I stayed neutral, neither correcting nor rescuing. I watched learning happen through friction. What surprised me was how relentless it all felt to him. The work never ended. There was always another decision, another detail demanding attention. Mental labor pressed down even when his hands were empty. I had carried that weight quietly for years. He came home drained in a way I recognized immediately, not angry, not defensive, just worn thin. The confidence he once carried was replaced by caution. He moved slower, thought longer, hesitated before acting. I did not celebrate this shift. I simply noted it. Respect was forming not through apology, but through effort. Understanding was arriving the only way it ever could. Still, I knew better than to trust beginnings. Anyone can try for a week. Real change lives in repetition. Time would have to pass before this weight settled into him, and before I could believe it was no longer mine alone. Months passed, and nothing dramatic happened. That was how I knew it was real. He made lists without being asked. He learned which groceries lasted and which spoiled fast. He cooked simple meals that slowly improved. Laundry was separated. Bills were tracked. Things got done quietly. I kept my boundaries steady. I did not step back into old patterns. I did not rescue missed details. We rebuilt routines piece by piece, not out of guilt, but necessity. Responsibility was shared because it had to be. The difference was not perfection. The difference was consistency. Effort showed up even when no one was watching. When work was heavy, he adjusted instead of assuming I would. When plans changed, we talked before decisions were made. Trust did not return all at once. It grew slowly, through repetition. I noticed how my body stayed calmer, how resentment stopped accumulating. The house felt lighter, not because work disappeared, but because it was no longer invisible. What happened before was not erased. It did not need to be. It became context instead of a wound. Respect was now practiced daily, not promised. Still, one part of the past remained unresolved. A voice that once shaped our imbalance had not yet been addressed. Stability inside our marriage was growing, but one final conversation waited outside it. It happened without drama. We sat across from each other in a quiet room. No audience, no urgency. She looked smaller than I remembered, hands folded, eyes steady but unsure. The apology came slowly, without explanations or defenses, and I could feel the difference immediately. There was no attempt to soften the past or redirect blame. Responsibility was named and left where it belonged. I listened without tightening, without preparing a response. My body stayed calm, grounded in the knowledge that I did not need to convince anyone anymore. What mattered was not forgiveness spoken out loud. It was the absence of control. The space she gave me to accept or not accept, to feel whatever came next. That restraint told me more than words ever had. I responded carefully, with boundaries intact. I did not minimize the harm, and I did not reopen it either. I simply acknowledged the moment for what it was. When it ended, I felt steady. The power to define this story was no longer borrowed or defended. It was mine, and that allowed reflection. This story was never about winning or proving someone wrong. It was about visibility, about what happens when effort disappears into routine and love quietly turns into labor no one names. I learned that boundaries are not punishments. They are instructions for how to treat each other with care. What we rebuilt did not erase the harm. It gave it meaning. Partnership only works when weight is shared, when respect shows up in action, and when being seen is not something you have to earn. I carry that clarity forward now, into every choice I make. If you stayed with me through this, thank you. Listening is an act of respect, and I do not take it lightly. Stories like this live in silence until someone recognizes themselves inside them. If any part of this felt familiar, I want you to know you are not imagining it. Invisibility has a cost, and it is allowed to name it. You are allowed to expect balance. You are allowed to stop holding everything alone. If you feel comfortable, share your experience in the comments. What did it take for you to be seen? Or what are you still carrying quietly? If this story helped you, consider liking and sharing it so someone else knows they are not alone. Thank you for listening.